hearing John Terry say this is a little bit like taking a penalty in a Champions League. Icon Series is a golf event that is played by non-golfers. It is played by professional athletes from different sports.
I've not seen many challenger sports brands anywhere in the world that are doing it in the way you're doing it. Hello and welcome to the Attention Shift podcast. Today I'm joined by Chris Sice. Chris, how are you doing?
Yeah, all good. Looking forward to chatting.
Me too. Chris, you've worked through some amazing projects down the years, but specifically we're here to talk today about the Icon Series and the most recent edition of that was done out in Thailand. So, can you sum it up for me a little bit? What is the Icon Series?
If you're a creator who wants to build a career like the Sidemen or Emma Chamberlain, here's one to watch. You've built the audience, you've got the revenue. How do you take to the next level? Right now, everything you built depends on you showing up. To break out, you've got to look beyond the next upload. The creators building real businesses aren't just making better content. They're building assets that work without them. We've mapped out 4 phases which will turn you from a creator to a media empire. Read the guide, start building beyond the upload.
So Icon Series is a golf event that is played by non-golfers. It is played by professional athletes from different sports. And over a weekend, you'll have 4 sessions of golf, and it is, proper golf, proper competition,
intense,
televised on Sky, and the likes of Sky around the world. 4,000 or 5,000 people a day, and maybe there's been 6 or 7 of these that have been done over the last 10, 12 years. The last one we've just done in Bangkok was a football edition. And you had the likes of Batistuta, Zola, Gareth Bale facing off against an England side of John Terry, Theo Walcott, Joe Hart. So 12 players on each side, 2 golf captains. We had Danny Willett and Thomas Bjorn as the golf captains, leading them in a team match play event over the weekend.
Interesting. So, I guess as well, there's a little bit of the backstory about this. So the series itself didn't start necessarily as a broadcast play. Like, this was an idea of the founder, Thomas Brooks, to see what would it be like if you move, I guess, elite athletes out of their comfort zone into a sport that they wouldn't necessarily be associated with for fans. Is that sort of where his original idea came from?
Yeah, I mean, I think, essentially presenting players in a different manner under different sort of competitive rules and seeing could they switch sports and win. I think there's a level of intrigue that comes with that. It so happens that a hell of a lot of sports people, tennis players, F1 drivers, footballers, they love the golf.
Yeah.
So put them in a different competitive environment where it's their passion and they love it. Add proper competition around this, and you've got the sort of ingredients for them to really want to be involved rather than this be a sort of paid affair where they're turning up because they're being paid. They do this because they love it at the heart of it.
Yeah, you can. The experience certainly came across to me, like the intensity of the competition, but also how much they were enjoying it. And I think what was interesting as well is, in the world now where we hear a lot of talk about creators and celebrities doing these kind of things, why was the decision made to go and pick athletes to go and do this rather than, I guess, look, it's vogue now, right, to use creators or celebrities. Why go and pick athletes to get them out of the comfort zone?
I think there's a greater intrigue. I mean, you see, we've all grown up and we've seen celebrity golf over the years. You see sort of exhibition golf and, you've seen Ronnie Corbett, Piers Morgan, you see those sorts of things. Absolutely, and they're great, but we use the phrase a little bit. It's like, actually, Icons, it's not a hit and giggle. It isn't just sort of a fun event. This is proper competition. And it is genuinely interesting to see some of these elite sportsmen in a different environment. And it's particularly humanizing, actually, when you see some of these guys talk about first tee nerves, really hearing John Terry say this is a little bit like taking a penalty in a Champions League match,
Yeah.
and in meaning it. So actually, football, you do it by muscle memory generally, and then there'll be occasions when it is just you, everyone is watching, and you need to deliver. And I think actually they love those moments again. You know, particularly as the majority of people who play, and not everybody, the majority of people who play, they've come to the end of their career. So actually put them in a new competitive environment, and they love it actually. And it's intriguing. It really is intriguing just to observe and see how they deal with those pressures and hear those moments of nerves where they actually reveal it. They don't hide it like you might in football. They reveal it, and that is very relatable.
And interestingly for me, obviously, some of these players will have known each other and will have been teammates, but also probably rivals down there. Were there any, I guess this is a geeky question, were there any rivalries that are sort of overhung from past tackles or experiences that you've noticed?
I mean, it's quite interesting hearing some of them, actually. I can remember John Terry last year, I was asking him about Tottenham, and we talked about rivalries last year, and almost every player, they kind of fended away the question. As, you know, footballers are skilled to do so. John Terry, he absolutely didn't. He said, I hate Tottenham. And he said, if I come up against David Ginola, it will mean more. And we loved, you know, it was brilliant. There's also a certain playfulness that comes with that. But actually, some of the rivalries bring up other storylines. They bring up a sense of you wanting to see if, you know, Ince will beat Batistuta, you know, the sort of great England-Argentina rivalry, or other storylines, you know, Arsenal-Tottenham storylines that come up. So I think viewers, audiences can engage in a different way, and it's brilliant hearing players talk quite freely in a way they might not have done many years ago.
Yeah, I think that the competitive edge of these athletes, but also like because you're used to seeing them playing for like God, Batistuta's probably one of my heroes, right? And Zola certainly, being from sort of the same island that I was born in Sardinia, even though I don't sound like it. Like to see them actually talk, you know, because you used to see them playing in a football shirt for the clubs they played for, having done what they've done, and you know, Batistuta with his long hair back in the day, and it was only later on in his career where he had the short hair. But to then hear him talk about his experiences and in that environment, it's quite disarming when you see them like that.
Yeah, and I think you see and feel something different that you haven't come across before.
Yeah.
You know, we noticed it. You know, so I've been involved the last couple of editions, and I noticed it last year. We asked a few more football questions, and we didn't necessarily get fascinating answers. Actually, when you went at it in a slightly different way, into what is a passion centre for them, they open up in a different way.
Yeah.
And that, I think if you, the audience, and you know, there's so much content out there, if you're getting something that feels different, you're able to see a different side of these personalities. That's interesting, and people lean in that much more if you're able to get that. And I think there's something about them playing golf and then revealing things that is much more engaging for an audience.
I often say these kind of experiences, it's the stories behind the stories that really get people, I think, to resonate with them and to connect with them. From, I guess, like you said, you've been doing this 6 or 7 years now, and you've done this with different sportsmen and women from different backgrounds. What have you started to learn over that period of time? What have you started to refine with the different formats that you've used for this?
What have we started? What have we learned over the time? You know, I think at the heart of it, you've got to get the golf competition right, first of all.
Yeah.
You know, that's the last edition we had was a little unbalanced. England team were much better, brought in much better players this time. If at the heart of it, your sport is aligned, and the truth is, whatever, you know, I'll talk a lot about content. We'll talk a lot about audience participation. There's many things you add into those formats, but at the heart of it, you want great sport. So I think the key thing is get those sides really balanced, and fortunately we did this time. That gives you the foundations where there's just incredible winners, losers, you know, structure for storytelling that sport, you know, delivers in an incredible way.
Yeah.
You know, and then I think we've started to layer in format points or other storytelling means that bring this to life. I think really importantly, bring a different audience in. And that's something that we worked on quite a lot as we're a challenger brand. So
Yeah.
you need to work harder to build that brand, to create storylines in the build-up to this that draw an audience in to even be curious. There's a starting point that you need to do before you even get to the event. Otherwise, you're just awash with so much noise out there. So there's a lot more work that we've done, I would say, particularly in building storylines and ways to film with the talent in the build-up before you even get to the event that gives you a chance to bring that event to life in the way you'd like.
Yeah, look, I'm a sucker for things that look nice as well, and I think the visual storytelling that you've done with it, the way it's designed, the whole look and feel of the brand, and the way that you build up that storytelling before, throughout, and afterwards. I've not seen many challenger sports brands anywhere in the world that are doing it in the way you're doing it. It looks top-end premium, but there's still a connection, like you said, to the sports individuals who are part of it as well. I think it's very unique how you've done it, and it can't help but draw the eye when you see it in amongst all the content formats.
That's great to hear. There's a chance you have him. I think if you build the right team around this, but I think most importantly, right at the heart of it, the players. The real storytellers. If they love it, if their eyes light up as you're doing it, you got a greater chance of creating great content. And I think in truth, it really stems from them being open to do this and allowing us possibly more time than you might get on other events that I've worked on in the past. They give us a lot more time because they love it.
Yeah.
And there's a value exchange, actually. They look pretty good at the back of this as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure people watching this and listening to this are going to be sort of curious around your distribution model, right? Because you talked earlier about, you distribute via the legacy media companies like the Skies of this world, and that's really, really important because that reaches a demographic. But also you do a lot of distribution through different social media and video platforms as well. I guess, so the question for me is like, look, it's always going to be a challenge, right? Because you're a challenger sports brand. But what kind of opportunity does that actually give you? That there is no set way that you would distribute this because it's a new format essentially.
Yeah, it's a balance for us. TV is really important. TV is very important for our partners. It's important for the high CPMs that also come with TV. And there's a certain amount of legitimacy as you're building as a challenger brand where, even for players, they love knowing they're going out on Sky or Canal Plus. Yeah. But I think around that, particularly in us trying to build for, as I described, the modern fan, being able to work with YouTube and offer many more ways in and audience participation methods, I think is really key. And the distribution around that is critical as you're building awareness, as you're building reach. So I think there was 25 publisher partnerships that we had. I think we had 10, 12 creator watch-alongs. We had 7 or 8 creators there. Yeah. Their involvement is crucial in expanding reach in a very different way, hitting different audiences. So the combination, for me, really helps you cut through in a way that's credible. And I think it's a really exciting area in navigating this new ground. But yeah, we're really pleased with the results.
Publishers are competing for attention, but they're using old formats. Writing more articles won't fix declining revenue. The opportunity isn't more content. It's the ownership of live moments. When big events happen, like sports finals, breaking news, cultural moments, publishers should become the digital stage. Interactive formats, audience participation, sponsored integrations. That's how you create inventory brands will pay for.
No, look, it is challenging, right? And you could throw it out there in so many different places, but you want to get the right balance. I know that obviously we play a small part in terms of helping you with around that distribution side and the driving that getting the audience to interact with it as well in a way that TV doesn't do it in the same kind of fashion. And we had some success this year. We had a few different partners, right, with people like LiveScore coming on board and actually taking the feed, which is a toe in the water for them because they've not really done anything like this before. So it's interesting that they're starting to see the power of this because normally people would expect to see that on YouTube, but Facebook started to play a role again in terms of being an area where live can be distributed because for a few years kind of went away, but it seems to be starting to rear its head again and sort of put its hand up and say, no, this is a viable alternative as well now for distribution.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with our numbers, Facebook was surprisingly high. I think there's a lot of us in the UK who might have gone through that period of it having a certain amount of interest and then dropping off for certain of us. In Asia, huge. And actually some of the partnerships that we then built delivered big numbers. And that was maybe 20% of our numbers. Higher than I might have anticipated months ago. But yeah, really a really important partner.
And how do you balance, I guess, protecting the brand and distributing through these different formats? Because ultimately you've got different partners around, they've got different wants and needs in different territories. Like, God, how is that balanced, I guess?
I mean, we're learning, to be transparent. Last year, we did some creator watch-alongs last year. There was some people suggested, and I said, maybe not this time, because you were learning, we were putting our toes in the water, and I really didn't need some people to then be dissing what they were watching. It wasn't the right time for us. This year we did, double the number of creator watch-alongs. But I think you also learn to trust that certain partners you work with, they get it. Who are more mature. You work with a DR Sports or something like that. Brilliant partner. Completely understand what we're trying to do. Tonally understand how to work, and you create a real partnership, and they know their community, and actually giving them the ability with their own tone of voice to add to it, only build a sort of trust relationship that they got with their audiences that bring more people in. And I think it's a really important area with rights holders being comfortable being slightly uncomfortable as they loosen the reins of who they work with. And I think that will be a topic over the next few years to observe how you can do more with creators, but with fans, actually. I think you need to put your toe in the water and try these things and see the value that can come, and navigate a few areas that you learn may not be exactly as you wish. But if you don't do it, you're never going to learn.
I suppose, as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. So if you're going to be critical on something, if you're the one who's been given access to that, like, be constructive at the very least. Like, don't be, you don't have to, you can say you don't like something without being abusive about it, which, look, fans can sometimes, the emotions can run high and they can go a little bit outside of the lines. And we all understand that because we're all fans of something. But I think when you're getting access to something like that, I think it's important as well to be, again, constructively critical, respectful. Like, if you're going to critique, but there's got to be boundaries, because that doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, I think there's got to be an understanding as well. Even somebody said to me earlier, said, have a look at our Bale Bullard. He did a sort of match up and, package that up for YouTube. And they said, actually, look at the comments below. And generally when somebody says, look at the comments, I take a deep breath and, oh, God, here we go.
Yeah.
And actually, comments, 90%, 80% actually really positive. You can learn from. So frequently you have to go in and just be comfortable with the sort of stuff that does get provoked online, particularly when you're dealing with something as partisan as football. I'd expect the majority to be either slightly out there or possibly negative, whether fair or not. So you have to take some of that with a pinch of salt.
So this year was interesting as well, because you bolstered the internal team that was working on this as well. So you brought Joe Bassin, who's got experience with I'm a Celeb and Soccer Aid, and Tim Lacey from IMG Golf. And I think Tim's been there for a long, long time, right? And you can see in the quality of the production. And look, it was good last year, right? But he went to another level. How does that feel to be able to bring those kind of people into the mix on this? And what do you think it brings you in terms of the output?
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. Both of those people are really talented, and they bring a real level of expertise. There's also a manner. What I talk about quite a lot is trying to create a one-team mentality.
Yeah.
We've got golf expertise in the room, we've got entertainment expertise in the room. Also, we've got social in the room, and they're in the room. Normally, social or digital are parked outside. They're sat by the toilet and they're seen as teenagers.
That's normally where I am.
Well, that's where I've grown up as well. So it's fine. You can still operate from there, but you just got to be nimble. But actually, trying to bring people into the room, if you've got different levels of genuine, real expertise, and you combine that, then I think you can create a coherent product rather than particularly digital and social add-ons, which, I think we've all probably been involved with over the years. But it really helps. Golf is complicated.
Yes.
That is a really complicated production, way more so than something like football. And if you go into the OP truck, and observe 6 or 12 golf matches going on at the same time, and work through how you present that at the same time while you're bringing entertainment into this, there's a level of, I call it creative friction, actually, that we are still learning. And if there's the right environment, and what I'd really credit, Tim, Joe, and, Adrian, our social guy, with, is actually blending together and sort of pushing and pulling and understanding. It might not be their area, but actually listening and learning. And then you've got a chance of creating a new type of cocktail. That it helps if you've got people who've been around, but are still incredibly open-minded about how you might create something new. And I think creatively people love that. They like pushing boundaries from what they've done before. So that was my sense of how they came together.
And would you say that that's an advantage for you, being a challenger sports brand, that you can mould the entertainment and the competition together? Similar, I don't know if you saw last week, Formula E did the Evo sessions, right? And they brought arcade in. And again, you could see that similar. They brought entertainment to that. There was competition about that. The creators really wanted to win, and there was a crash, but there was an entertainment angle to it that you don't see in most sports. That's how you cross over, for me, onto the YouTubes and actually win an audience, not just putting a sport on there and hoping for the best.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's fortunate if you start without the rules. Yeah. I did something years ago called F1 Mocks, and I worked as part of a official partnership with Formula One management. It's that many years ago. It was with Bernie in the day. Yeah. And what was very good for me is I learned about rights the hard way. I felt I was sort of beaten consistently as we were trying to do creative things, but I understood the rules. And if you're on the outside trying to change existing rules, that's quite hard.
Yeah.
This is part of the things why I enjoy this role so much. If you're right at the heart of the rights holder, who's open to say, okay, let's push the boundaries. We don't need to do that in the same way as other people do. I think creatively that allows you much greater license to do things differently, and sometimes you don't get it right, but be able to push. It's much harder within an existing legacy organisation. So we're pretty fortunate in that way.
What we really, obviously what we sort of co-developed together, like we did the interaction hub this year as well, where we were driving visitors to ultimately engage with a number of things through it. And I think the thing that stood out to us, I think, was that close to 50% of people who landed on the interaction hub actually engaged with one of the interactive elements that helped to drive some of the decision making that was going on around the event as well. That I don't think it felt intrusive. I think it just felt part of it, and I think that's a balance, right? I think we had 22,000 people who did something, who were willingly taking part, and I think that's probably one of the things that I guess we're proudest of being involved with this. That it felt baked in, didn't feel like a bolt on.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I'd credit you guys with is what is the editorial suggestions you make enhance the product. They're not novelty interruptions. And I've seen over the years in doing different digital interactive pieces, sometimes being guilty of coming up with ideas. They sound great.
Yeah, me too.
They're quite interruptive. They're interruptive. And I think your guys have been around the block that much and worked with different rights holder that there's an understanding of editorial and actually putting pieces in that what I most want is I want to extend time spent viewing.
Yeah.
I want people to lean forward. I want them to emotionally engage with something. And golf can be a bit boring at times. I like it. I can't watch most golf for long. So if there's reasons to get me leaning forward and saying, voting for whether Bale or Bullard are going to win, or being part of a community where I can post messages and see them up as a part of this, I'm much more likely to stick around. And that, I think it's finding a way to enhance rather than interrupt. That, for me is where, you guys have done a great job, and, I see it in watch times. I think, it was only earlier that I saw it actually. The singles on day 2, session 2 is 36 minutes. That's the average viewing time. The average viewing time. That's massive.
Yeah.
Coming from TV or looking, even at what we did last year, there's some damn good reasons to stick with the sport that I would say if you were watching general golf, having people watch for an average of 36 minutes is wild. I think that's rare. And a lot of that I definitely put down to an audience who are much more engaged and have a reason to be.
Yeah. Look, look, I think we found you in that sense, right? That we have similar belief systems that the audiences want to feel like they can shape the content that they're watching. They don't just want to passively watch it. They want to somehow feel like they're part of it in some way, shape or form. But like you say, it's picking those moments, because you do have natural blocks in golf where there isn't a lot happening, but still Josh might be doing an interview with someone at that point. So that's really, really important. We don't want to interrupt that either. So the windows are relatively small, and it's finding the right ones that then it ultimately flows, like you say, not that, we're going to go to social corner now, which is one of my pet hates when people do that, because it's not the way to do this. It's got to feel like if you're having a WhatsApp conversation with a mate, like it's the most normal thing in the world, because you just do it whilst you're doing something else. It's not like it feels like a bolt and you say to him, just 1 second, I just need to go and do it. It just happens, and it has to work in the same kind of way. And I think that's what I often find that with most things that I see where this happens, it feels like a bolt-on. And that's why it never works. And that's why people never get the kind of traction with it, and then they wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's a discipline in knowing where to use it and when. I enjoyed last year, the production company that we worked with, who were terribly good. I remember them saying before the event, you're trying to do too much. Trying to run before you can walk. And I respected them, saying this. Golf is a little bit different. At the end of it, they said, can you introduce us to your guys, to you? Because they could see the value that it brought to the broadcast, that it was different, it was fresh. And, I quite like the journey.
Yeah.
Sometimes that people go on around that. And also, no doubt there'll be some things that we tried, that don't work as well. And that's great. We can see that, we can dispense with those things and identify the things that really do touch people.
The biggest events of the year are gold mines for publishers, and Display's new research shows you exactly how to cash in. We analysed over 30,000 comments across the US election, the World Cup, the Met Gala and more, uncovering 8 ways audiences engage, so you can package, price and sell your content and own the conversation, whether you have broadcast rights or not. Head to display.com insights to download Harness the Hype today.
We often say that when we have our little sort of conversations internally as well, that I guess official sports data will give you the facts, but fan-generated content will give you the feeling. And marry the two things together and you have context. And ultimately that's all you're trying to achieve. And I think more and more people are starting to see that now. Like I said, going back to that Evo session I saw as well, like they did things in their own ways, right? It wasn't necessarily how I would do things, but that didn't make it bad. Like it was good how they did it, and they did a different form of storytelling. I must admit, I watched some of it and thought, oh yeah, I've not thought of doing it like that. Like so, and it's rare that I see stuff and think, oh, I've not seen that. There was some genuine stuff in there where you think, yeah, there's some takeaways there that is a different perspective I wouldn't have necessarily thought of myself.
Yeah.
So, I guess the future of sports content, beyond the live window, look, you and your team, right, you are, I guess, there's a pre and there's a post, right, but the course of that weekend, yes, there's the streams that are going live as the competition is happening, but there's the storytelling that's going on around it as well, using different forms of VOD content. And I always sort of liken that to almost like you can almost call that the live moment, because even though the event itself is happening within a certain window, the window is much bigger than that. How do you think about almost like for something that happens in a relatively short window, almost like an always-on strategy? How do you think about how you extend that window to what is like the rest of the year? You're kind of in off-season, right, until the next thing. How would you use the content that's been created to continue to maintain that audience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly interested in us creating formats.
Yeah.
Creating formats, and series that actually, irrespective of events, you can just keep running throughout the year. That, I think, makes a hell of a lot of sense for us, as we will have a number of tentpole events that will be spikes that come. So, I think crucial for us to create formats that just keep the hum ticking along. And then as you build to event, there's a lot of work that we did this year in saying, I described it, we wanted to put a flare up in the sky. I think just as you hit event, it's very easy to suddenly get noticed. By the time you notice, the event's done. Yeah. So actually during the week, actually the task I put to the team is I said we had to have 2 bangers that you could put out that would really create a spike of interest. We did one thing with a sort of drone shoot, and we got all the players, all the presenters involved, and actually wondered whether we'd quite pull it off. But actually, doing that, we've got everyone participating. You've got, I think, all the players, collab, they all got involved. Your distribution is that much wider, then suddenly you can put this flare up in the sky that you kind of need to do a couple of days before the event, and then carry your audience into event. So, as I see it, there's sort of evergreen content that you need throughout the year, and then there's certain spikes that are incredibly important as you start to build that audience and try and keep them over a period of time. Is part of the overall plan, rather than you can get lost having a sort of one night stand, just if you think about it as one-off events, I
think that's what legacy media, traditional media is often done, right? They'll build towards one thing. And I think also that's, to a certain degree, how advertising industry is also structured as well. Like, it's one big push, campaign, it's done. And once it's live as well, it's very rare. I mean, it's starting to change a bit now, but very rarely anyone touches it. It's kind of like, it's out there now. And it sort of lives and breathes, but there's never... You don't see any tweaking and changing to it, or any reaction to what's happening to fuel. I think the specific thing of the drone thing, that probably had its content plan on its own, right? The drone video, because I saw videos of how do we make that behind the scenes, and like I say, and players sharing their perspectives as well. Like, with a good plan, that becomes, like I said, a monster in its own right, and it's one thing. So you start doing 10, 12 of those, then you can see how you can build a window of really engaging content.
Yeah, I think it's... I think, and even we're learning as you do it, but actually you do an initiative like that, the array of different versions that come with, the tease, the full thing, in particular, the behind the scenes, the real sense of actually what was going on around that. People are fascinated by that at the moment, and kind of I was as well, just looking in on it being filmed and seeing the players' reactions, watching our drone guy, who was sitting in a wheelchair, with his mask on, and we pushed him around the clubhouse. Then at the end of that, he replayed it, and there was the production. There was, 10, 12 people looking over him in his wheelchair, looking at this screen. And then I noticed there were 4 or 5 players trying to sort of find their way through. In truth, I wanted to say to our team, you just push back this Gareth Bale there, let him have a look. But actually, it was, insightful and fun, and I wanted to see that out there as much as the real thing, the polished piece. So I think thinking in breaking that down as a series in its own right is, I think, something that all rights holders want to do now, and you can leverage even more value out of that if you can think about it and find the time to just create a plan around it. And I'd still say we're learning, as you're doing it. But there's a hell of a sort of life cycle that you can get from every content initiative you do.
And it's part of doing those kind of content initiatives as well, where, because look, whenever I look at, I guess, European sportsmen and women who are not necessarily as versed in making this kind of content as our American cousins are, right? Because you can see some of the stuff that Kobe Bryant did down the years for Nike, and like, you know, as a lecturer in a classroom, and like, well, you know, where Kobe's almost, you remember some of those where Kobe's almost like lecturing everyone. We don't often get that with European sportsmen and women because they're not used to the same kind of acting, as it were. But I always watch that whenever I see these kind of things. But they looked like they were genuinely invested in what it was, and it felt real. It's the thing I always look for.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen, I've never seen talent as invested as they are around this. I've never seen it, and that's, they enjoy it. There's a certain amount where, excuse me, I'm very conscious about the amount of time we use.
Yeah.
They're there to play golf, and you can ask for too much, but actually, frequently around this, on the whole, they really enjoy it. They want to get involved, and there's an environment in which, they're looked after pretty well. It's a pretty sweet environment. So giving a little more than you might do otherwise, saying there might be something in the contract says you might do a couple of posts, all of that's ignored. They post what they want, we give them the sort of things that they like, and they like, yeah, great, give it to us at the right time, in the right place, I look great. More and more, there's more and more involvement, and I think everyone talks about doing something authentic. If you have your talent at the heart of it, they like what they are doing, my God, that shines through. And then we're in a really lucky position for this to be quite playful, and it's, the world's your oyster in what you can create around this.
And you can see that as well. I think I get the sense there's a great deal of, people are there to work, there's a great deal of fun as well while they're doing it, and that creates a great environment, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a general sense around, the whole production, the whole event. Players like it, people around it. I mean, it worked pretty hard. I mean, events are pretty hard work, but there's a buzz that generally floats around where there's less of a us and them. Not being able to touch the talent or be able to talk to them. Kind of everyone's there as a part of it, trying to create some magic. And at the end of it, it's pretty euphoric. The players, most importantly, come out of it feeling good and trusting. There's definitely a trust about the storytelling and cameras that are around that aren't there to show them up, but make them look great. That I think helps everybody.
So I guess, look, as a challenger sport, there's always going to be challenges, right? Because it's not an established format, but I guess there's also probably a freedom to what you're doing as well. So what is the one thing that, if you could give advice to traditional sports organisations, that they're missing when it comes to how to, I guess, engage with the modern fan in terms of how they consume content digitally? What advice would you give?
I think one of the areas is interesting is getting people into the room. It's often easy to get the most experienced people in the room who've been doing TV forever. And I think getting more, kids in the room, getting smarter people who come at it with a social first mentality and bringing a cocktail together of, that helps you shape the product. I think that's, for me, really key. And if there's one area that we're still talking about, is we still think there's more work we need to do to change the tone of what we produce. And that's quite intangible. It's quite intangible moving from classic broadcast, where you're above what's going on, commentating, looking in, to being a part of it and bringing the viewer with you on the shoulder of your talent. And I think that is still an exercise that we're working through, that I think creatively is fascinating. And I think you're getting closer to creating some really fresh feeling content. There's a certain amount of YouTube tone, but quality that can still come from broadcast. And I think you need to experiment with different people in the room, but definitely don't just leave the old guys to come up with how it should be done and then pass on that to social diversion, what they're doing.
I think you're right. It's a co-creation exercise, right? They've got, like you said, they've got to be in the same room. And I know, similar to you, I've been in plenty of those environments where, like you said, certain people are sat outside the room, and if they're not part of it, then you cannot hope to reach all the different audiences that sit in lots of different places now, because we live in a fragmented world. It's just not possible. You've got to have all those people in the same room.
Yeah, for sure.
Chris, this has been fascinating. Obviously, I hear a lot about this all the time, right? Because we've been working with you now for a couple of years. But to be able to have this conversation with you and go through this and hear some of your experiences, it's great. Obviously, I only see photos from my guys on the ground and the great fun that they're having that I'm not having when you do these things. So it's great to speak to you and get a bit more detail on it. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Great to chat with you, Ed.
You too. Thank you. So thank you for joining us for this week's episode of The Attention Shift. Don't forget, I always get this wrong, to like, subscribe, and if you want to feature as a guest, give us a question or tell us how bad I've been at interviewing. I'm hopefully getting better. You can email us at hello@attentionshift.media. Goodbye, and thanks for now.